All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to another tier list. We're going to be doing something today that has been vastly requested over the past months, actually, not just weeks, but months. Um, and that's going to be talking about team game civs and strategies that you guys can use to get better results in your own games. So I've been requested general team game content, more of it. And I figured a good place to start could be a tier list, just showing what the best civs are. And today we're going to be starting with the best archer civs in team games. Now, it is a bit different than 1v1s because archer civs in 1v1 can generally be the ones that are the most well-rounded because you might need to switch into cavalry, into some siege, but really in team games, the meta when it comes to playing archer civs is to play archer pretty much consistently, never really switch. You play archer, then crossbowman, and then arbalest, and then only in late game can you find yourself attacking into different compositions like heavy cavalry archer, like your unique unit archer units, and like some siege. Really, generally speaking, you stick with the archer units in team games. And so this is why for these civs, it's going to be pure archer civs that will thrive. So my criteria is just going to be how good is their archer units. That's the best thing as far as archer, crossbow, and arbalest. Put a heavy emphasis on their tech tree there and their bonuses for that particular group. The second thing can just be like general civ bonuses that go into helping their archer play. And then the third criteria will be what can they transition to in the late game that is going to be helpful as a flank role in the archer department. So something like a heavy cav archer or a unique unit will be present in that third category for today. So without further ado, let's hop right into the tier list and see what we have present for us. And like I said, this is going to be for 4v4, 3v3, 2v2, no matter what form of team game. If you want to play archers, I highly recommend you follow some advice I will put here and this order of civs that I will place as far as which one will be the best for your choice. And then lastly, also choose between your personal preference as well, because that's going to be pretty helpful. All right, so I have my tier list already made as usual. We're going to start out with the Aztecs. Now, Aztecs is something that get Arbalest. It's a civ that gets Arbalest. They have a really good eco bonus, but they're missing some key technologies for their Arbalest. They are missing Thumb Ring, which comes into play usually mid-castlage, and you really want that as the flank, sometimes early castlage depending on the situation. And then they're also missing the last armor on the Arbalest. So Aztecs are something that can play archers just fine in the early game, but around the mid game they start to struggle because of lack of thumb ring, and by the late game they're missing two pretty essential technologies for their arbalest. So I gotta put Aztecs at a C tier. They can still pass as a flank civ for different purposes if you want to open archers and then switch to eagle warriors, but for this list we're focusing simply just on archer civs, and we want to be able to play archers long term as well. So Aztecs, not a terrible choice, but not going to be the best one at all. Next up, we've got the Berbers, and this is a little bit of an interesting civ because you do have some really reasonable transitions in the late game. They have the Cavalry Archer, and they have some reasonable Cavalry Archer as well. So Camel Archer and then Cavalry Archer as options in the late game, but I really just can't justify giving them more than D tier because of the fact that they're missing Arbalest. It's just too huge. They also don't really have a great eco bonus besides the Vills moving faster for their archer play to help them in the early game. So Berbers is really something that should probably be playing Cav in the team game, Cavalry, Knights, and the Cavalier, and then in the late game, it can definitely transition to Camel Archers. Now, I will say the maps where Berbers can be a really good civ are the maps that let you get turbo into Camel Archers. If you're playing a closed map like that, Berbers become, all of a sudden, a very good archer civ. But the maps you have to play archers in the early game, then crossbow, then hopefully Arbalest, Berbers kind of don't do really well there. They're missing too many upgrades, and they don't have the eco bonus to really help out in that department. All right, Britain's everyone's favorite civ on the channel. We have the famous Nerf Britain, please. And in this tier list, it's actually going to be very relevant. Nerf Britain's, please. The guy was right all along. And Britain's will actually be S tier. It's just the stock standard. We compare all archer civs to Britain's. A civ that gets an eco bonus at the start of the game, that has faster producing archer ranges for the entire team. So simply having Britons on your team is going to give everyone on your team a massive advantage, especially useful in 3v3s and 44s where you have usually two archer players on the flanks. So Britons is going to be one of those civs that just dominate from the get-go. They also get the extra range in castle for their crossbowmen. They also get the cheaper TCs, which lets them go for a nice little quick boom. And then finally, in Imperial Age, to top it all off, they get extra range on their archers, one more, and then plus another one from the unique tech in castle. Makes for a total of +3 range for the Arbalest, and that's coming at a very small cost of them losing thumb ring or not having access to thumb ring, but that's been made up and double and triple by the fact that they have really great Arbalest with a lot of range and longbowmen in the late game. And then just generally speaking, Britain late game options with werewolf trebuchets, sorry, it's not going to turn into any creature at midnight or anything like that, or at full moon or whatever the story there goes. But yeah, they have a really complete composition with the werewolf trebs, the longbows with the arbalest and imp, and then just like really beefy castles to secure your position. They're the perfect flank civilization in my opinion, and the best proven 2v2 archer civ in the game at the moment. Next up, we have the Bulgarians. So that was North Pole with Britons. This is South Pole, the complete polar opposite here. In the Bulgarians, it's an easy F tier. You don't even have to think about it. I mean, you don't even get crossbowmen, and that's going to be an immediate down to D tier, unless your eco bonus is insane. But again, Bulgarians, no insane eco bonus. You don't want to be playing archers with Bulgarians on the flank. And again, they could be good for other things like men-at-arm tower on the flank, but this is a pure archer civ tier list, so they're going to be easily in F tier. Not much else to say. Next up, another civ with the B, Burmese. And Burmese, gotta look around. Ooh, unfortunately, it's going to join the Bulgarians here. Once again, Burmese, the difference between Burmese and Berbers is that Burmese actually don't have an archer unique unit. A Rambai could be considered range, but not considered an archer unit in my books personally, because it functions differently and doesn't benefit from Bracer and stuff. So we'll leave Rambai aside. But Burmese is not going to be... is not going to be anything higher than F tier, because although they have crossbowmen, they're lacking so many upgrades that just makes them not the most viable in the early game, as well as in like the mid game. And then finally the late game is the worst because they don't have Arbalest and they're missing 2 archer armors, which is very, very bad for Burmese. So definitely something that's, and I believe they're missing thumb ring, right? I hope I'm not mistaken saying that. Burmese is definitely something you want to avoid playing archers with. Stick to men-at-arm tower if you find yourself on the flank with Burmese. Byzantine, all right, that's another civ that's going to be maybe find its way in the mid tier here. It's actually going to find its place with Aztecs. I put it with Aztecs. I'm actually thinking of bumping it up to B tier though. I'm going to make a quick switch on my own tier list real quick, and that's simply because Byzantine, although they don't have the best economy bonus for archers, they actually get better as the game goes on, and their biggest bonus on the flank is the fact that they can go with a faster Imperial Age, because the Imperial Age is cheaper by about 400 food, around 400 food, and around 300 gold. So it's a pretty big discount on their Imperial Age, and definitely something that helps to get them that Arbalest spike. And then for the late game, they have amazing defense with their high HP castles. They have really cheap scrims, which could come in handy in certain cases. And they just have Bombard Tower, Bombard Cannon, and Siege Ram, which is everything you can ask for an Archer civ. So definitely a B tier civ with Byzantines, something that you can consider picking up, you know, here and there. Next up is the Celts, and the Celts is going to be a nice little easy D tier. And while the Celts are actually not that bad as an archer civ, in my opinion, just because they have an amazing early game in terms of economy, they fall off very hard in mid-castle age, missing Thumb Ring, missing Arbalest, missing Bracer. I mean, the list goes on. You don't want to be playing, archers with Celts. And while you can transition to Siege, and that's why I put them at a D tier, because they have really good early game eco for archers with the wood bonus, and then simply transitioning into Siege and infantry could be a really good long-term switch. They're not easy to play, and I recommend you stay away from them if you're looking for just a pure archer civ. Celts is not your go-to there. Although, like I said, still passable and still decent as a flank civ. Next up, we got the Chinese, and that's going to find its way in the A tier, believe it or not. It doesn't compare with Britons, in my opinion. Britons is always going to be a step above these civs, just because of, at the top level, how much you can make use of that extra range and all the Briton bonuses that help archer play in general. That although I think Chinese have one of the best economies in the game for flank, I think that's, they're not going to be as strong as the Britons, just by a little margin. But Chinese are still great. They have really good techs. They have all the techs for archers. They have really good early game eco, if you can manage their start, of course, and maybe just something for a bit of a higher elo civ pick. And then they also have the Chukanu in late game with Siege Ram and Bomber Tower, so they have a really, really nice late game transition in terms of archers as well. And then just their eco that can carry them through the game, and the cheaper techs makes them a solid A tier civ overall. One of the best, one of the top 5s for sure on Arabia archers. Next up, we got the Cumins, and Cumins is going to be F tier again, and I'm going to really kind of speed things along with these F tier civs. They don't have Arbalest. They don't have Arbalest, and they're missing a lot of other techs, and especially in the case of Cumins, you're missing Bracer, and you don't really have a good transition to late game. Kipchucks are not really going to cut it. You don't get there from the flank. It's very hard to do so, and 2TC booming is something that's much more suited towards the pocket. So Cumins are a cav civ, more often than not an archer civ. Next up is the Ethiopians. That's going to go right back to the A tier as well. And that's another one that could kind of compete with Britain's, but it's just a step below. They have a really nice eco bonus that helps them with power spikes, and they can pull off a nasty Drush FC. They also have the strongest archers in the game in terms of fire rates only, but that fire rate can translate to really high DPS. So Ethiopian archers are nothing, nothing to joke about, but they're not going to be as good as the Britain extra range. Once again, I always compare the Civs to the Britons. That's why I can't really justify them at the S tier. That being said, though, Ethiopians are at A tier. Good eco bonus with the power spikes of the 100 food, 100 gold at every age up, and then just really strong army, and then really good siege for the late game to close it all off. Next up, we've got the Franks, and the Franks, unfortunately, probably the only tier list you'll catch me saying this. Franks are going to go to F tier. They have a really reasonable eco, but they don't want to be playing archers, guys. Thumb ring is missing, Arbalest, Bracer, Last Armor. Too many things missing for Franks to be ever good on the flank. Keep them in the pocket, let them play Cav, and if you're on the flank, maybe even still try to play Scout Skirm, just because their Knight gameplay and their Cav gameplay is so much stronger than their Archer gameplay. And if you open Archers, that's totally fine. Just make sure you find a way to transition back at the Cav at some point in the mid game or afterwards. Next up, we've got the Goths, and while I don't think the Goths are a bad flank civ, as we've seen from the Chinese style, the WWP guys that played Goth to lame early, Goth are simply not a good archer civ, and they have a lot of problems in that department. And although they get Bracer and stuff, they're not bad, and you can even put them at a tier with Celts, actually, now that I think about it. Yeah, let's put them at the tier with Celts. They can kind of pass because they have Bracer, coming in clutch, but they're missing other technologies that are just going to slow them down. And their eco bonus isn't great these days, just that extra Vil that you save because you have instant loom, you get basically a Vil lead. So they have a decent eco, and they can transition into infantry long term, but they are tricky to play and definitely better as a pocket civ that can open knights and then transition into infantry while having a safe place to boom up, naturally. Flank is a little bit harder to make them work. Next up, we've got the Huns, and the Huns are an interesting civ because they have a really, really good transition in the late game to the cavalry archers, but cavalry archers are not going to be as good as crossbowmen in the mid game, simply because crossbow you can mass from the feudal age, and you don't need to wait till castage to start massing them. And so if you try to go cavalry archers too early with Huns on the flank, you're going to get steamrolled by early crossbows with ballistics 9 times out of 10, unless your opponent makes a very big mistake. So for that reason, I'm going to put Huns at the C tier with Aztecs, because you have a really good early game with Hun eco, and you can play crossbows, but that kind of early game power spike for Huns or early game eco bonus kind of falls apart in late game because you're missing the last armor, and you're also missing Arbalest. So you have to make a transition to heavy cav archers, and although they're cheaper, it's still a little bit awkward. So that's how I place Huns. Definitely not a bad civ on the flank, but definitely not your go-to. Definitely better as a cavalry civ for team games. Next up, we've got the Incas, which are going to find their place as well with the Huns in C tier. Although they're completely different, Incas actually have full tech tree for archers, but they're missing any reasonable eco bonus that really push them up above and beyond. I compare them with Byzantines, who have the same situation as Incas, but instead Byzantine just have the cheaper imp, so they're a little bit better with the archers. So Incas definitely solid, but not something that can really push any higher than a C tier. Next up, we've got the Indians, and that's going to be very similar to the Huns, but kind of a step below. You have a decent eco for the early game with archers, and eventually you want to transition into cavalry archers, and in some niche cases, on maps that are not open, elephant archers. You'll never ever hear me saying that on other circumstances, but like Black Forest, elephant archers can be really good. You have me there. But Indians, let's consider Arabia for instance, because that's what this tier list is based off. So Indians, I would say D tier. For that reason, transition to cav archer is viable in some cases, but not all, and usually you're gonna die to Arbalest with it. Next up, we've got the Italians, and Italians are not actually a bad civ at all. I'm gonna place them at B tier these days, because you have cheaper university techs, which actually get a little bit of a spike with ballistics and chemistry, save a little bit of resources there. You also save resources on clicking up to the next age, and you also have fully upgraded archers with a really good late game in Genoese crossbow and the unique tech, which gives an extra pierce armor and melee armor to archer units. So overall, or is it pierce armor? It might just be only pierce armor. Ooh, Hera doesn't know his stuff. Correct me on that one, chat. Let me know in the comments below if you've made it to this part of the video what the Italian unique attack does. If it's at 1 pierce armor or +1/+1 for melee and pierce armor, let me know. And sorry if I'm talking too fast. I just want to get all the information out there. Watch the video at slow speed if you want to, or rewind if you miss any parts. So Italians is going to find us stuff at a B tier. Very smooth civ, not a powerful one, but a smooth one, and that definitely very valuable. And Japanese is going to find itself in the same boat. Very smooth early game eco, full tech tree for the Arbalest. Not as good a late game as Italians, but still the early game pressure that Japanese can put off, especially with men at arms, make them a very good archer civ in the early game, and I think that's going to be enough to push them to B tier for me. Next up is Cumin. This is going to be a little bit surprising for some, but Cumin are actually going to be at a C tier and not a D tier like some of the other cavalry civs, simply because you don't need the barracks for Cumin, so they can get up to a mean archer rush, and you also have Bracer and Arbalest with them. So they remind me a little bit of Aztecs, and for that reason, they'll find the same tier as them. Next up is the Koreans, and Koreans are actually going to find themselves in B tier. They get free archer armor at the start of every age, and they also get cheaper units in terms of wood. So Koreans are naturally very solid on the flank civ. So I have to do something real quick. On the as a flank civ, because you're going to be playing archers mainly, and they also have a really good late game transition into wagons. So, you know, Koreans do have enough bonuses to really push them to a B tier, in my opinion, and the late game is very good to carry them, and they could even be like an A tier or even S tier civ in late game situations for sure. But overall, B tier seems reasonable. Next up, we've got Lithuanians, which I'm going to actually put in D tier. They're like a standard cavalry civ, but they have bracers, so their crossbows aren't terrible, and they have thumb ring, and they have the potential to switch into cav archers in the late game. So Lithuanians are definitely not a bad civ, but definitely not something that scales really well because you're missing Arbalest. So be careful, Lithuanians, but it's not the worst civ ever. Next up, we've got the Magyars, which are going to find their place at C tier. Now, Magyars are actually pretty underrated as an archer civ, because usually we think about them as a cav civ or a cavalry archer civ, but they actually get fully upgraded Arbalest, believe it or not. So Magyars can play early game just fine, and their biggest weakness comes to the fact that they have no eco bonus. So, you know, they can play it fine, but they're not going to excel in the early game, but they actually do start to excel in late game if they can make a transition to the Magyar cav archer, which is probably the best viability, best cav archer in the game in team games, Maggot aside. Just because of the versatility of the extra attack and range, and just the ability to do the highest DPS makes the Magyar cav archer the best in the game, in my opinion, in team games. So very strong overall, but the weaknesses for Magyars are in the mid game for sure. So I couldn't really justify putting it to B tier, but you know, C tier, and it's I think maybe even a little bit underrated even in C tier. Next up is going to be the Malay, and the Malay is going to find itself in B tier. Although Malay is a little bit hard to play, and generally it's thought of as a naval civilization, I would actually argue that Malay is a very good archer civ because of the fact that you can get extra villagers. You have the chance to get a faster imp. You have extra villager because your feudal age is faster. And you have a faster imp versus most civilization. And you also have full tech tree for Arbalest in late game with bomber cannons. That's pretty solid. So for me, Malay is a standard B tier civ, although it's a little bit tricky to play, and I'd argue, what's the word? Not argue. I would advise against it if you're not very comfortable with surviving early game in a bit of an awkward situation. Next up, we've got the Malians, and this is another one that's going to find its place at the D tier. And although Malians are thought of as a very smooth civ, they're more of a 1v1 civ in terms of what their tech tree offers, or in team games, a cavalry civ. They're lacking bracers, so although they have Arbalest, which isn't terrible, I couldn't really justify putting them at C tier. These civs are all better than Malians because they all have bracer, and Malians have thumb ring, so they have some advantage over Khmer and Aztecs, for example, but I just didn't feel like it was as strong of an archer civ as these civs up here. So you could argue that Malians can find their place in C tier, and you might be right. For me personally, I have them kind of closer down towards, like, I don't know, how a Berbers would want to play or how a Celt would want to play in the early game. Next up, we've got the Mayans. I'm going to go right back up to the A tier here with the Mayans. The stock standard archer civ as well. Not as good as Britons because that extra range from Britons is unmatched in my opinion. And Mayans are definitely very solid in their own right though, cheaper archers. They lost obsidian arrows recently, but they still got the really nice plumed archer transition in the late game and siege ram available with all archer techs available as well. The team bonus of Mayans to have cheaper walls also kind of helps the entire team, but not only that, it helps them secure their map early, which is something that's very important for archer play on a team game. So Mayans, very good archer play, definitely A tier, not quite as good as Britons though. All right, moving swiftly along here. I want to make this video like to around 25 minutes, hopefully. So we have the Mongols here, and the Mongols are gonna be an interesting one. So I put Mongols at B tier, and the reason for it is they have one of the best starts in the game as far as early aggression goes, but not only because they have the extra food from the hunt, which could be similar to Lithuanians. I don't want to argue that. Also, the best team game bonus could be or yeah, it could be the team game bonus. Could be the faster. Sorry, say the best team bonus for team games is the bigger line of sight on scouts. I completely messed up my words there. Excuse me. Bigger line of sight on scouts for Mongols helps the entire team and gets everyone off to a good start where you don't get lamed. You have the chance to lame your opponents, and then you also get faster uptime with Mongols to make use of that faster scouting as well and attack your opponent and potentially kill them in the early game. If you can survive the early game, or if your opponent survives the early game, their mid game is really nothing special, but then they start to become really good at the end game if they can get to Maggot and Siege. So really good early game, really good late game. Middle kind of sucks, so that's why I put them at B tier. But again, Mongols, not easy to play in terms of like a smooth transition, but easy to play in the sense of you always get a good start with them. Next up is going to be Persians, and that's going to be a D tier civ. I don't want to talk too much about them. They remind me a little bit of Malians. They have a decent eco, or sorry, Celts maybe, or maybe Berbers. They have a decent eco. In the early game, they have Thumb Ring, which is decent for Castle Age, but then they're missing Arbalest. And yes, they have Trash Bow, but they're also missing Bracer. So I don't know how much you value Trash Bow, but for me, not too much on team games because you have trade anyways. And you can argue that Persians have really good cow archers, but they're missing bracers, so those aren't the best either. So I put them at a solid D tier. Not the worst thing, but not the best. Next up, we've got the Portuguese, and that's going to find themselves at a very healthy B tier, actually. Savings on gold units, full upgrades on the tech tree. You can't really go wrong with Portuguese. You also get free Carto, which helps a lot with your team. So that's a nice little side bonus that they get. And the late game is very good with the Arquebus, Bomber Cannon, and organ guns as a potential transition, or just the bomber cannons themselves, as well as bomber towers as well. So like Portuguese, really good late game transition, really good throughout the game, and they get fast attacks that helps them kind of turbo along the early and mid game as well, and some niche help in the late game as well. So I would say Portuguese are very solid civ, but can't really touch the top, the top few civs in terms of strength. All right, moving along here, we've got the Saracens, and I'm going to put them at a very interesting position based on how the Chinese teams were using it in Battle of Africa. And Saracens did undergo some changes recently, but I still think the same thing is possible till now. Saracens are A tier. The market abuse in combination with archers dealing more damage to buildings is absolutely massive. They can go archer opening, market abuse to get like a 17-minute fast castle or castle age. After opening archers, 17 to 18 minutes, they're in castle age with a ball of X-bow, and then they go all in 3 ranges. And that's so deadly on the flank to the point where it can even take games from Chinese and Mayans and Ethiopians, and even in some cases Britons, because of how strong that combination is with the faster market, and also the extra damage to buildings and the faster breaking in makes Saracen very dangerous. And Lix was using it to amazing success in Battle of Africa on Arabia type maps. So definitely up there for Saracens in terms of archer civs and team game. Next up, we've got the Slavs, and unfortunately, it's another F tier civ. The eco bonus is more about the farms, not about anything anything gold and wood. So for me, Slavs don't really have an eco bonus. They're missing Arbalest, they're missing Bracer. They might be missing Thumb Ring. In fact, I think that they are missing Thumb Ring. So Slavs have nothing going for them, unfortunately. D tier it is. Spanish. No, Slavs. F tier. Sorry, not D tier. F tier. I described everything was terrible. F tier for sure. Spanish, F tier. No cross moves. Conks are not archers, so F tier for sure. Next up is the Tatars. Now, the Tatars are going to find themselves in an interesting position as well in the B tier. And although they don't have Arbalest, they have really, really good spikes with free Thumb Ring, and the early castle helps a lot with your crossbow play. And then you also have amazing cavalries in the late game, so the transition for the Tatars is slightly more smooth than something like the Maggots, because like I said, you have the eco bonus to the sheep, and also the free Thumb Ring, which gives you some power spike in the early game or mid game. Next up is the Tuins, and they're going to find themselves in F tier. Similar to the Slavs, they have an eco bonus that saves them some wood and food on the farms, but nothing too crazy to help them with the archer play, and they're missing Bracer, Thumb Ring, and Arbalest. That's the trio that just puts every civ to F tier. Next up is going to be the Turks, and the Turks are going to find themselves at the D tier. They're like Magyars, pretty much exactly like Magyars, but they have slightly worse cavalries in my opinion, because HP is not as good as attack and range for archer units, generally speaking. And they also don't have Arbalest. So they have gold bonus, like they mine gold faster, so they have slightly better eco than Magyars, but still not as good late game, and not as good in the mid game when Arbalest kicks in as well. Vietnamese is going to be an easy S tier. In fact, A tier. In fact, Vietnamese and Vikings both will be A tiers because they both have really good economies, and they both have really good archer units in general, full tech trees for both, and Vietnamese even getting extra HP on their units. So that's going to do it for our archer tier list. It's pretty good. I've revised it multiple times, and Britain's is going to stay unmatched at S tier because it's simply better than every other civ in like 9 out of 10 situations in archer civ play on open maps like Arabia in team games. So hopefully this answered a lot of questions in terms of what's the best civ on team games on the flanks with archers. Hope you guys have a great day, and hopefully this was helpful in some way or another. I'll catch you guys next time. Take care, and bye for now.